All right, so we will start off with motivation, theories of motivation. That's kind of, in terms of this unit, especially with motivation and emotion, the different theories about them is going to be where you want to focus the most. All right, so motivation is any sort of thing that energizes. Oh, you're right. I need to share my screen. Thank you. Any sort of thing that energizes and directs behavior. Okay, there are 5 different theories of motivation. Right, all of them help try to explain different types of behavior. Okay, and they all kind of fall into different perspectives. All right, so the first one, which is basically goes into the evolutionary perspective of behavior, is that not as much with humans, but other animals, right? A lot of what motivates other animals' behavior is just simply instinct. Okay, instincts are complex, right, patterns of behavior that are innate, meaning they are inborn. They are patterns of behavior that are passed down, right? And they are performed the same by all members of a species. So, for instance, imprinting, when baby animals attach to the first thing that they see within the first, with geese, it's like 17 hours or something like that. And, imprinting is an example of an instinct. Salmon swimming upstream. Okay, turtles going towards the moon, going towards light. Dogs humping is an instinct. Okay, so they are consistent within a species, but there's not any cognition really involved in them. Okay, that is why humans don't really have a whole lot of instincts anymore, because our cerebral cortex allows us to kind of choose and make choices about behavior. Okay, so these are just evolutionarily, these are innate behaviors that help with survival. Okay, all right, so biological motivation. All right, what are biological factors that motivate many of our behaviors? All right, the theory that helps explain this is what is called drive reduction. Okay, drive reduction says that when we are not homeostatic, meaning when we are out of balance, that creates a drive within us to try to become homeostatic. So basically, drive reduction explains why we are motivated to fulfill biological needs. It is what is called an internal push. So if you're cold, right, you have a drive to get warm. If you're hungry, you have a drive to be full. If you're thirsty, you have a drive to drink something. Okay. If you're horny, you have a drive for sex. Okay, that's why it's called a sex drive. All right, so drive reduction theory, we are motivated to maintain homeostasis, and when we are out of it, we feel an imbalance, which creates that internal push or the drive. All right, so those 2 theories explain what we could call primary motives, which are motivated behaviors that we don't really have choice in. Right? They are just naturally motivating for us. Right? All of us are motivated to eat something when we are hungry. All right, but they don't explain what are called secondary motives. All right, or we could even tie this back to a previous unit. All right, we could call these secondary reinforcers. We know primary reinforcers are things that are naturally reinforcing. All right, secondary reinforcers are things that we learn are reinforcing. Secondary motives are things that we learn that we are motivated to do. So incentive theory, an incentive is the exact same thing as a reward. All right, we could put this one into the behavioral perspective. Okay, incentive theory says that we are motivated by either positive or negative environmental stimuli that motivates behavior. So either doing something because we're going to get something good out of it, that's an incentive, or doing something to avoid something bad happening. Okay, you're motivated to do the dishes if your mom asks you to do the dishes, and the incentive there is not getting in trouble. Whereas drive reduction theory is an internal push. All right, this one would be called an external pull. Okay, because it's something in the environment that is pulling us towards a behavior. A lot of times, drive reduction and incentive theory go hand in hand. If we're hungry, even when we're hungry, most of us don't reach a point of hunger where we would just eat absolutely anything that is put in front of us. Right? Drive reduction creates that internal push for hunger, but then we are also motivated by the incentive of eating something good. Okay, so if you're hungry and there is pizza that smells really good, that makes you even more motivated to eat that pizza. Okay?
Tragedy of Charlie Bag in 1990 is
Okay, all right, so cognitive theory. So incentive theory, we're motivated to do things by either getting something good or avoiding something bad. Optimal arousal theory explains basically what we are motivated to do to avoid boredom. All right, this one says that all of us, and this is different for everyone, all of us have an optimal level of arousal that we want to maintain. Okay, so it very much depends on the person and the situation. Some of you are probably perfectly fine, like staying in and watching Netflix by yourself on a Saturday night. Right? That might be the level of alertness and activity that you need. But some of you, and I fall into this category, are gonna look to do more on a Saturday night to avoid boredom. Okay, so we all just seek out different levels of arousal. Now, what they have found is that in terms of arousal and performance, we tend to perform the best at things when we are at a medium, a moderate level of arousal. All right? If our level of arousal is too high, meaning we're too stressed out, we become disorganized. All right? And if our level of arousal is too low, meaning there's not enough excitement, okay, we fall asleep or whatnot. All of us have been in that situation before where you know that you have to do something, but you are so bored that you can't even get yourself to do it, right? You're just like, I gotta do this, but you're so bored you can't even, okay? So for an optimal level of arousal, this is what is referred to as the Yerkes-Dodson principle of arousal, this inverted U. Now, Yerkes-Dodson says we perform our best when we are at a moderate level of arousal, but there are stipulations to this. For instance, all right, what they have also found is that when something is easy or you are good at it, all right, we prefer our level of arousal to be higher. All right, if you're doing something that's really easy, like stuffing envelopes, you're going to be perfectly fine talking to somebody while you're doing it, listening to music, watching TV, all these things. That's why when we do easy stuff, we want to have other things going on. Right? We could tie this back to something that we talked about in this last unit, which is social facilitation. Okay? People that are really good at something perform their best when they're on the biggest stage and when they have the most people watching them. On the flip side, though, if it's something that is hard or something that we are not good at, we prefer to have a lower level of arousal, right? Because we need to be able to focus, and if it gets too high, our performance goes down. Probably says arousal.
Okay.
Yeah. So high and low. All right. Are there any questions there about optimal arousal? All right, and then finally, humanistic theory that is kind of all-encompassing, meaning it kind of includes all of the other theories in it, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What Maslow's hierarchy of needs says, essentially, is that not all needs are equal, and that we are more motivated to fulfill certain needs rather than others. And the needs at the bottom are what we are the most motivated to fulfill. So at the bottom we have physiological needs, like we are motivated to eat, drink, sleep, right? And then we have safety needs, okay? And then belongingness, fitting in, and then esteem, feeling good about ourselves. And then at the very top, once all of those other needs have been met, we can strive for self-actualization, okay? But which is becoming the best version of ourselves. But it says if those other lower level needs are not met, then we're not going to be able to become at the best version of ourselves. That is why schools give free breakfast. Okay, because free breakfast fulfills those physiological needs. If you don't have food at home and you come to school, all right, and you're hungry, you're not going to give a shit what's going on in class, all right, because your basic needs have not been met yet. Okay? All right, any questions there? Okay, so there are the 5 theories. Intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Certain things, these are just how we are motivated to do things. When something is intrinsically motivating, all right, that means that we are going to be motivated to do this thing, all right, for the sheer sake of doing it, because we enjoy doing it. Okay, so if you play a sport because you just like playing it, all right, that is intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is when we are doing something, all right, for some sort of environmental incentive. If you play a sport, not because you like it, but because you know that it's maybe the only way you're going to be able to go to college, all right, that would be an extrinsic motivator. When we are intrinsically motivated, okay, our performance on things is better. Now, there's an issue here, what is called the over-justification effect. Which is when, if we are motivated to do something, if we are intrinsically motivated to do something, if you have a child that just likes to read, okay, the biggest thing that you can do wrong with that is take something that somebody likes to do for the sheer sake of doing it, and then add an incentive into it. Because we actually, once that incentive is added, so if you have a kid who just genuinely likes to read, and then all of a sudden the parents start paying them $5 for every book that they read, their intrinsic motivation to read goes away, and it becomes more, the extrinsic factor becomes more of a motivating factor, which actually makes us perform worse. A lot of times when we're doing something just for a reward, we don't perform as well. We're just doing it just for the hell of it. Okay. All right, motivation to eat. Okay, so obviously hunger is the need for food, and then satiety is feeling of fullness. We got to mostly know about the biological basis for eating. All right, and hunger on the biological level is referred to as a feedback loop. All right, because it is a constant communication between the nervous system and the endocrine system. All right, the brain, the hypothalamus, sends out hunger signals through the neurotransmitter orexin. Okay, and those hunger signals communicate with the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland causes the endocrine system to release certain hormones. All right, and then those hormones also communicate back with the hypothalamus. Okay, so make sure that you know, hypothalamus involved in hunger, and that it is a feedback loop. I'm not gonna. You don't. Well, I don't know this. So there are two different parts of the hypothalamus that are involved in hunger and satiety. The lateral hypothalamus. Lateral hypothalamus is the part of our hypothalamus that when it is stimulated, we will get hungry. All right? It releases a neurotransmitter called orexin, which just is basically a neurotransmitter that just gives an on signal to everything. Orexin is involved in feeling hungry. Orexin is involved in wanting sex. Orexin is involved in staying up later than you know that you should because you're watching a TV show. Okay, all of these things. And then in turn, okay, the stomach releases a hormone called ghrelin, all right, which is it's the stomach's hormone telling the brain that it is hungry. The ventromedial hypothalamus. The ventromedial hypothalamus is the part of the hypothalamus that tells the body that it is full. When this is stimulated, okay, you're going to get satiety, meaning feeling full. All right, it releases a neurotransmitter called anorexin, or it's anorexigenic. Okay, that is where the word anorexia comes from. When we are full, the stomach, our fat cells release a hormone called leptin. Right? Leptin is released when fat cells reach like they're breaking, like the point where they don't need anything else, when they're totally full, because fat cells get filled up. Like, they don't go away, they just get filled up. They release this hormone leptin, which tells the brain that it is full. Leptin is also released while we sleep, and which is why a lot of times when we stay up really late, where we normally wouldn't be hungry in the middle of the night because of the release of leptin, when we stay up really late, our body doesn't produce leptin, which is why we oftentimes get hungry late at night, because we don't have, like, it's not releasing that off switch. Set point theory. Okay, set point theory is the theory about hunger and metabolism that says that essentially the hypothalamus and the endocrine system work together as sort of a weight thermostat, right, through the release of those on-off signals. And the goal of set point, like, our body has an ideal weight, whatever it thinks that it is supposed to be. And if we fall, like, for instance, mine's 150, okay? If we fall below our set point, like if we're not eating enough, okay, then our hunger is going to increase and metabolism is going to decrease. And if we go above it, at least for a short amount of time, right, it's actually metabolism is going to increase and hunger is going to decrease. Okay? The problem with this is our body prefers to be fat rather than skinny. So if you drop below your set point, your body's going to do a lot to try to get that weight back on. But if you're above your set point, your body's like, well, this is fine, okay? It's better to be fat. And so a lot of times, when people get fat, their set point rises a lot, and it's really, really hard to lower your set point after it has gone up. All right, basal metabolic rate. I think we all know what metabolism is. Okay, this is just the rate of energy expenditure. It will influence the set point. A lot of it is genetic. Body chemistry, glucose and insulin. Okay, glucose is what we get from food, right? It is also referred to as blood sugar, right? And as we eat, our blood sugar rises. As our blood sugar rises, once it gets to a certain point, what produces insulin? The pancreas, right? Yeah, I think it's the pancreas. All right, once our blood glucose gets to a certain level, right, the pancreas releases a hormone called insulin, which regulates blood glucose, and actually, insulin helps convert blood glucose into fat. And so what happens is, as insulin is released, insulin lowers our levels of blood glucose, right? And that's why, and it does it slowly, which is why hunger comes on slowly. But as insulin is released, right, hunger is going to increase because your blood glucose levels are decreasing due to the insulin. Okay. All right. External cues for hunger. We tend to gravitate towards sweet foods, all right, especially when we're tired or depressed. And then we have, like, learned associations with hunger. A lot of us just eat dinner at the same time every day. Right? Even if you just ate a meal, if it's 6:30 and 6:30 is your normal dinner time, then you're going to be like, well, time to eat. Culture obviously plays a big role in it as well. What we eat, when we eat, why we eat. Okay, but we don't really get into that. I think, all right, so, bulimia, eating disorders, bulimia is binging and purging. All right, people with bulimia will oftentimes eat a lot, what is called binging. Then they feel guilty afterwards, and they purge, meaning they get it all out of their system, either by vomiting, or there's what is called exercise-induced bulimia, which is where people will just exercise really, really hard, like way too intensely after eating a lot. Binge eating disorder is people who they don't have the ability to control their eating. The difference between binge eating and bulimia is with binge eating, there is guilt after binging, but there is no purging. They just feel guilty afterwards. All right, and then anorexia. Anorexia is there's no binging with anorexia. It is starving itself. Starving yourself to below 85% of your normal body weight. A lot of this is due to the fact that people with anorexia oftentimes see themselves as being fat, even when there is, even when they are not fat. All right, and then obesity. People that are severely overweight. I can't remember what the percentage is, like what is considered to be obese. I think we all know what that is. Motivational conflicts. I doubt you'd be asked about these, but the two that you really only need to know are approach. All right, approach is when you have two options for something, all right, and you can choose either this or this, and you like both of them. Okay, both options are appealing, so you would approach both of them, right, and you have to decide which one you would want to do. Avoidance is when you have to do two things. You have a choice between two things you have to do, and neither of them are appealing. Okay, so you can either do your homework or you can do your chores, all right, and you got to decide which one. Then there's what's called approach avoidance, which is like when you have to choose between something that you like to do and something that you have to do, but you don't really want to do it. All right, as I said, so with sexual motivation, really the only thing that I think you would possibly be asked about with sexual motivation is Alfred Kinsey's studies from the 1950s, where he surveyed 18,000 people to find out the sexual habits of Americans. He wrote 2 books about it. One's The Sexual Habit of American Male. It's called something like that. Sexual Habits of American Males and Sexual Habits of American Females. What he found was that Americans were a lot kinkier than people thought. And there was a lot more stuff going on in the bedroom than was assumed. The other thing that you could possibly be asked about is the physiology of sex, right? What is called the sexual response cycle. Right? This is Masters and Johnson. They filmed 10,000 sex cycles. Most of them were sex workers. And what they found was that it's basically a 4-step process. The excitement phase, when the genitals become engorged, okay, with blood, right? So it's just the buildup. Plateau is when you're like kind of like just at a peak, and not at a peak, but you're like at the point, at the highest point of sexual arousal. Orgasm is pretty self-explanatory. All right, and then after that, especially with males, females don't really have this. All right, but with males, there is what is called the resolution or the refractory period, which is a period after orgasm that a male cannot have another orgasm for a period of time. It can be minutes, it can be hours, it can be days. All right, there you go. Sexuality, okay, main takeaway with sexual orientation is there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that there is any choice that is involved in sexual orientation or any environmental factors. The idea that like a child being raised by two dads makes them have a higher chance of being gay is absolute nonsense. Sexuality is biologically determined. Hypothalamus plays a big role in sexuality. Genetics, prenatal environment, being exposed to different hormones or chemicals in utero. Okay. Not going to worry about all that. Oh, well, achievement motivation. Okay. People who are high achievers tend to set their own goals, and they like to do things that are moderately challenging because they are being challenged, but they can also succeed at it. People who are high achievers also tend to be intrinsically motivated. Low achievers, other people set goals for them, and they tend to like to do things that are easy. They do things not for their own sake, but to gain approval from others. They tend to be more extrinsically motivated. All right. Are there any questions about motivation before we move on to emotion? So, with the theories of emotion, 4 of them. Well, 5. Really, just like looking for keywords in questions about them is what you would need to do, because all of these theories kind of explain the process of emotion differently. 2 of them are not really considered to be correct anymore, and then 2 or 3 of them, however we want to break it up, are considered to be correct. So emotion is a combination of any of these 3 things, which is physiological arousal, right, which is autonomic nervous system, expressive behavior, how you react to something, and then our conscious experience of the emotion, how we interpret the physiological change and our expressive behavior. So, first theory, and I don't know, James Lange theory, William James and Carl Lange. Okay, this one, James Lange theory, is a linear theory, which means it happens 1, 2, 3. This happens, then this happens, then this happens. What James Lange says is for us to experience emotion, there has to be some sort of environmental stimulus, like a bear. Right? That environmental stimulus causes physiological arousal, a physical change, And then from that physiological arousal, we get emotion. So it basically just says that specific emotions are tied to specific physiological changes in our body. Now, we know that this is incorrect because the same physiological change is linked to different emotions. Your heart pounding could mean that you're afraid, but your heart pounding like that could mean that you are excited as well. Okay, so that is kind of how we know that that this one is not really considered to be correct. A little bit of evidence for it, but not a whole lot. All right. Cannon-Bard says that, so this one basically helps explain like emotions that happen really quickly. Cannon-Bard says that there is the environmental stimulus, but instead of the pounding heart causing the emotion, it says that these two things happen at the same time. Okay, they are, keyword for this one would be, they are simultaneous. So essentially what it does is it says that it sends the physical signal down to the autonomic nervous system, and then at the same time, the thalamus routes it to the cerebral cortex as well. So we feel we understand the emotion, and we feel the physiological change at the same time, but the two things are separate from one another. Criticism of this is, what they have found is that like people that are paralyzed from like the neck down oftentimes don't feel as strong of emotions. Emotions sometimes aren't as potent because they are not necessarily able to feel the physiological change in their body because they're paralyzed. Do we not label the label comes later. The label is the next theory. All right, so you can think two cannons firing at the same time. All right, now the theory that is considered to be correct, at least in most cases, is what is called Schachter-Singer two-factor theory. All right, what this theory basically says is that emotion is a combination of physiological arousal plus what is called a cognitive label. All right, a cognitive label is our interpretation of the physiological change. Basically, how are we going to understand? How do we understand the physiological change that we are experiencing? When our heart is pounding, what is the label that we put onto that? And then from that label, we get the emotion. Example I always give is, if you want to feel really strong emotions for like your boyfriend or girlfriend, right? And they're coming over, go for a run or do something physical right beforehand, all right? Because when you see them, your heart's pounding, we oftentimes go to what is the most likely emotion, most likely thing that we are feeling. And if you see your boyfriend or girlfriend heart's pounding, you might think, oh, it's pounding like that because I love this person. All right, how do we appraise how we are feeling? All right, what is called cognitive appraisal. So there's the arousal, there's the cognitive label. Now, these newer theories, right? Zizhenk, I think it's Zizhenk, Ledoux and Lazarus. I call them high road versus low road, and both of these say that emotion and conscious interpretation don't always go hand in hand. So what these theories say is that we have a couple of different emotion systems, and some emotions affect us differently. Some emotions affect us differently than others. The low road of emotion is this idea that some emotions just happen automatically, and there is no cortex involved. It is literally just the thalamus sending the signal straight to the amygdala. So this is like when, if you're out in the woods, okay, and you see and something like moves out of the corner of your eye, all right, and you jump back automatically without even thinking about it, all right, that is the low road of emotion. And then from there, you can then decide whether or not it's something to be afraid of. A good example of this is in horror movies. A lot of times in horror movies, when we start getting that really uneasy feeling, but we don't necessarily know why we are feeling like that, in horror movies, they will oftentimes play certain notes that are below our conscious awareness, all right, but can automatically cause us to feel fear without us understanding why we are feeling fear. The high road, what is called the cognitive appraisal theory, is basically, this is like the opposite of two-factor, where it says that we have the physiological change and then the cognitive label. This one says that that the physiological response and the emotion come after the cognitive appraisal that we do with situations. So for instance, like if you're about to go out and make a big speech, and you look out there and you realize that there are way more people out there than you expected, you might start thinking to yourself, oh crap, that's a lot more people than I expected. And then from that cognitive appraisal comes the physiological change and the emotion. All right, are there any questions about that? Okay, so there's the low road, and then there's the high road. 7 primary emotions. You can just look those up. Okay, well, joy, anger, interest, disgust, surprise, sadness, fear. They have facial expressions, and our expressions of those emotions seem to be universal. Not all facial expressions are universal, but those 7 do seem to be universal. And they're universal because it allows for us to communicate without talking. Facial feedback effect. So there is this is sort of what we could call support for James Lange. What they have found is that through the activation of certain facial muscles, we can then feel a certain way. So when we activate the muscles that are involved in smiling, sometimes just smiling can make us feel happy, or frowning can make us feel sad. Now, it's not clear with this. Is it the muscles that are causing us to feel that way, which would support James Lange, or is it our expectation? Is it top-down processing? Is it, oh, I'm smiling, that must mean that I am happy? There's also what is called the behavior feedback effect, which is basically, we talked about it last unit, which is like sitting in a certain, like sitting with your legs crossed can make you feel insecure, whereas like sitting like man spreading can like make you feel more confident. Okay, stress. All right, general adaptation syndrome. They like asking about this on FRQs. Hans Sale's general adaptation syndrome describes our response to stress. It says that we respond to stressful situations in 3 stages. The first one is what is called the alarm stage, which is when the stressor is presented to us. Okay, our body is going to start to release adrenaline, start to release cortisol, and whatnot. All right, once we are just in the process of dealing with the stressor, this is what is called the resistance phase. Our body is basically just maintaining high alert. And eventually, our body, we can only deal with stress for so long. And eventually, our body if we're in the resistance phase for too long, our body is going to start to shut down. And we're going to go into the exhaustion phase. Exhaustion is when our resources are depleted and we are more susceptible to illness. Stress and personality types. Type A personality, more at risk for coronary heart disease. Okay, people with type A personality tend to be very competitive, workaholics. People with type B tend to be more laid back. Catharsis is emotional release. Okay. It was believed for a long time that being aggressive towards something actually made us feel less aggressive. What's called the catharsis hypothesis. What they have found is that being aggressive towards something can take away our feelings of aggression for a little while, but actually it makes us more aggressive in the long run because it's negatively reinforced. We learned that by being aggressive, we feel better for a short period, so it tends to make people more aggressive because they feel good for a little while. That is called the catharsis hypothesis. All right, almost done. Okay, health and happiness. Okay, explanatory style, optimist versus pessimist. People that are optimists deal with stressors better. They have a better sense of control. People who are pessimists expect things to go badly. They doubt their ability and their sense of control. People with optimists tend to have what's called an internal locus of control, which means they feel that they are in control of things that happen in their life. People that are pessimists tend to have what is called an external locus, which is where they feel that things are outside of their control and that everything is up to just luck. Let's see. Feel good, do good. When you're in a good mood, you're more helpful. All right, so last couple things. All right, what determines happiness? Well, happiness in some aspects is relative to our own personal experiences. Adaptation level phenomenon is the idea that even when we are presented with something new, it may seem like if you're having to move, right? You're having to go to a new school, okay? It may be very daunting at first. You might be really upset about it. You might be really scared, blah, blah, blah. But after a while, we adapt to whatever new situation we are put in. Okay? And that can be sensory adaptation, right? That can be level of income, right? You know, if I could say that, I would be so much happier if I made $50,000 more, and I might for a little while, but after a while, if I'm making, $105,000, right? After a while, that just becomes what is my normal. Okay, so we adapt, and we basically almost always just go back to neutral. Think about like when you were a little kid and you got a present, and it was so exciting at first, and then after a while, you're just like, all right, whatever. All right. Our own happiness is relative to other people's success as well. This is what is called relative deprivation. Relative deprivation is the idea that we tend to believe that we are worse off than the other people that we compare ourselves to. All right, when we are comparing ourselves to our peers, we generally tend to think that we are worse off than them. All right, this is why places that have a large income inequality tend to be less happy. Okay, this goes up and down. We tend to believe that people who have more than we do are happier than they actually are. And we also tend to believe that people who have less than we do are less happy than they actually are. So we underestimate the level of happiness for people that have less, and we overestimate the level of happiness for people that have more. We feel deprived relative to who we compare ourselves to. Okay? All right, are there any questions there about any of that? No? Okay, guys.